I escaped my apartment at 3 in the morning with smoke in my lungs and nothing on me but my phone. When I called my parents for help, my stepfather, Mark, practically shrugged through the phone and said it wasn't his problem. A few days later, I found paperwork I had never signed, documents showing my mother, Denise, and Mark as the sole beneficiaries of my renter's insurance, worth $180,000. When I finally stood in front of them and turned my phone around so they could see the screen, my mother's hand tightened around Mark's sleeve and she whispered very quietly, "We need to leave. Now." My name is Laura Jensen. I'm 32. The strange part wasn't just what they did. It was how quickly I realized this story hadn't started with the fire. That night started like any other ordinary night. I remember that part clearly because nothing about the first few seconds felt unusual. I had gone to bed late, sometime after midnight, and the apartment was quiet in that heavy way buildings get when everyone else is asleep. No traffic noise outside, no voices in the hallway, just that still, closed-off silence. Then something woke me up. At first I thought it was my smoke detector, but it wasn't loud enough for that. It was more like a faint crackling sound. Soft, irregular. The kind of noise your brain struggles to place when you're half asleep. I opened my eyes and the room looked wrong. Not dark wrong. There was a haze in the air. At first, it didn't even register as smoke. It just looked like a thin gray fog floating near the ceiling, slowly drifting downward. I sat up confused, and the moment I breathed in deeply, my chest burned. That was when my brain snapped awake. Smoke. Real smoke. I swung my legs off the bed and my feet hit the floor. Even through the grogginess, I could feel the air was warmer than it should have been. Not hot yet, but thick, heavy. My phone was on the nightstand. I grabbed it without even thinking and walked toward the bedroom door. When I opened it, the hallway outside was darker than the bedroom, but not because the lights were off. It was because the smoke was thicker. There's this strange moment your mind goes through in emergencies where it still tries to negotiate with reality. I remember thinking maybe something small had burned in the kitchen. Maybe I left the stove on. Maybe it was just a pan. But the smell told a different story. It wasn't food, it wasn't plastic. It was that harsh, chemical burning smell that makes your eyes water instantly. I didn't even bother putting on shoes. I just turned around, grabbed my phone tighter in my hand, and ran for the front door barefoot. The hallway in my building felt like stepping into a completely different world. Bright flashing lights were already reflecting off the walls from outside, and someone down the hall was shouting. I could hear alarms going off now, multiple ones, echoing through the building. I made it down the stairs with a few other residents, all of us coughing, all of us moving fast but not quite running. That strange mix of panic and disbelief. When I stepped outside, the cold air hit my lungs so hard it made me dizzy. I turned around then. And that was the moment I understood how bad it was. The windows of my apartment unit were glowing orange. Not flickering, not smoking. Glowing. Flames were already pushing out through the edges of the frame, like something alive inside the walls. Fire trucks were pulling up one after another, lights spinning across the street. Firefighters moved fast, carrying hoses and gear, their voices sharp and practiced. Someone guided us farther away from the building. I remember standing there barefoot on the pavement, clutching my phone, watching the place I had lived in for years burn like it belonged to someone else. It took a long time before anyone came over to talk to me. One of the firefighters finally approached once things had stabilized a little. His gear smelled like smoke and water, and there was this careful tone in his voice I didn't like the second I heard it. He asked which unit was mine. When I told him, he paused for a moment before nodding slowly. Then he said something that felt unreal at the time. Everything inside was gone. Not damaged. Gone. My brain started listing things automatically, almost like it was trying to inventory the life that had just disappeared. The photo box I kept in the closet. Pictures of my grandparents I had carried with me through 3 different apartments. The guitar my late stepfather had given me years ago. It wasn't expensive, but it meant something to me in a way objects usually don't. Even my college diploma. All of it. reduced to whatever was left inside that blackened frame of a unit. I stood there in the flashing red lights, smoke still drifting into the night sky, and slowly realized that the only thing I had managed to bring out of that apartment was the phone still shaking in my hand. I didn't know where I was going to stay that night. My coworker, Eric, had always been reliable. He let me crash at his apartment for a few nights while I tried to figure out what to do next. I didn't have time to explain everything, but just knowing there was someone I could reach gave me a tiny thread of relief. I stayed outside the building for a while after that conversation with the firefighter, not really moving. People around me were making calls, friends, spouses, family members, voices low and urgent. Some were crying, others were pacing. A few people were wrapped in blankets the paramedics had handed out. I realized after a few minutes that I was still holding my phone. My hands were shaking badly enough that it took me 2 tries to unlock it. Calling my mom felt automatic. I didn't even really think about it. When something bad happens, you reach for the people who are supposed to care. Even if you're an adult, even if you live on your own, there's still that instinct buried somewhere. I tapped her contact and held the phone to my ear. It rang longer than I expected. For a moment I wondered if she'd sleep through it, but eventually the line clicked and she answered. Her voice sounded groggy at first, the way people sound when they've just woken up. But the grogginess disappeared pretty quickly once she realized who was calling. I told her what happened. Not in some long explanation, just the basics. My apartment had caught fire. I had to run out in the middle of the night. Firefighters were still putting it out. There was a pause on the line after that. It wasn't the kind of silence I expected. I thought she'd ask if I was hurt, or if I needed somewhere to stay, something normal like that. Instead, her voice came back tight, slightly irritated. Not angry exactly, but inconvenienced. Like I'd just called her about something frustrating instead of something serious. She asked a few quick questions, but the tone behind them felt strange. Detached, more focused on what had happened than on whether I was okay standing outside in the cold. At one point, she let out a quiet sigh, the kind people make when they're tired and don't want to deal with something complicated. Then I heard movement on her end of the phone. My stepfather, Mark, was in the background. He asked her something, his voice muffled, like he hadn't taken the phone yet. I couldn't hear the exact words, but she told him it was me and that my apartment had burned. There was another pause. Then Mark took the phone. His voice was fully awake, not groggy at all. I explained again, a little slower this time, that there had been a fire, that the firefighters said everything inside was probably gone. When I finished, he didn't react the way I thought he would. There was no shock in his voice, no concern, not even confusion. Just a short response that sounded more like someone commenting on a minor mistake. He told me I should have been more careful. Not loudly, not yelling, just matter of fact. Like the situation was the natural result of something I'd done wrong. I remember standing there on the sidewalk, staring at the flashing red lights reflecting off the pavement while he said it. My brain struggled to process the comment. The building was still smoking behind me, and the conversation felt like it belonged to a completely different reality. When the call ended a minute later, I lowered the phone slowly. The cold had started creeping into my feet from the pavement, but I barely noticed. What stuck with me wasn't just what they said. It was the absence of something. The absence of urgency, of worry, of even basic concern. I couldn't quite put it into words then, but something about that call sat wrong in my chest. Not dramatic, not obvious. Just wrong in a way I couldn't explain yet. After the fire, the first few days were a blur of smoke-stung eyes, cold showers at Eric's apartment, and moving a few salvaged things into a storage unit that still smelled faintly of ash. I didn't know where to start, but I knew I had to get the insurance sorted if there was any hope of rebuilding even a fraction of what I'd lost. My hands shook every time I picked up the phone to call the company, half expecting them to tell me there was nothing they could do, or worse, that the policy didn't exist. When I finally reached someone at the insurance office, a man named Greg, the conversation started routine enough. He asked for the usual details: unit number, date of the fire, list of major items lost. I rattled off what I could remember: my grandparents' photos, my late stepfather's guitar, even my college diploma. My voice felt hollow even as I said the words, like admitting the things were gone made it more real. Then he paused, scrolling through his records. I see here. The beneficiaries listed on this policy are your mother and stepfather, Denise and Mark Jensen. 100%, he said, not with judgment, but with that kind of neutral business tone that somehow makes bad news feel colder. I froze, my mouth went dry. I tried to understand what he had just said. Wait, I said slowly. How could they be the beneficiaries? I never signed anything. Greg shifted on the other end. This form shows it was submitted about 2 weeks ago. Signature matches what we have on file. I felt my stomach drop like I'd been punched. My mind spun, going over every interaction I'd had with them, every visit, every call. Nothing had indicated they were ever meant to benefit from my policy. I could see the numbers clearly in my head now, $180,000. It wasn't just money, it was my life, the life I had tried to protect in the small ways that mattered. Paying rent, keeping insurance up to date, making sure I had a roof over my head, and the few things I loved inside it. The absurdity of it made my chest tight. My own parents listed as beneficiaries without my knowledge? A red flag screamed at me from the back of my mind, but I tried to push it down, tried to imagine a mistake, some administrative error. My heart wouldn't let me. Something about the timing gnawed at me. The fire, Denise visiting my apartment just days before, that odd irritation in her voice when I called. All of it suddenly didn't feel coincidental. I hung up slowly, my hands gripping the phone like it could anchor me. The street outside Eric's apartment was quiet, but I could feel my pulse, loud in my ears. For the first time, suspicion crept in, a gnawing sense that someone had set all of this in motion long before the smoke ever filled my apartment. It wasn't clear yet how or why, but I knew with a cold certainty that whatever had happened wasn't just a tragic accident. Someone had crossed a line, and the line ran straight through the people who were supposed to be my family. I pulled my knees to my chest and stared at the phone, the numbers and names etched in my mind, and let the unease settle in. Something was very, very wrong. Even as I tried to focus on recovery, sorting through what little I could salvage, calling insurance and sleeping on Eric's couch, I couldn't shake the memory of Denise's visit 5 days before the fire. It had seemed innocuous at the time, almost casual. She had shown up unexpectedly, claiming she wanted to check in and catch up after years without contact. I had hesitated at first, unsure if I wanted her inside, but I let her in anyway. From the moment she stepped inside, there was a subtle tension I didn't notice then but now remembered vividly. She moved slowly through the apartment, not just walking, but examining. Her fingers lingered over surfaces, bookshelves, my desk, even the frame of my guitar. She asked questions about where I kept things, what I valued most, what I planned to do with certain items. The questions weren't innocent. They had this quiet precision, like she was mapping my life, taking notes I couldn't see. I remember watching her in the kitchen, hovering over my spice rack for no apparent reason, and feeling a weird mix of irritation and unease. It hadn't occurred to me at the time that this would become significant. She smiled, nodded at my explanations, but there was something else behind the eyes, calculation masked as concern. Later, in my apartment's living room, she lingered near the window, asking if I had considered moving soon or updating my insurance. I brushed it off, thinking it was just a concerned parent. That memory replayed relentlessly now. I could almost feel the weight of her gaze on every object, on every choice I had made in that space. A few days after the fire, when Detective Nolan asked about who had been in the apartment recently, I suddenly remembered every detail of her visit. It wasn't just a fleeting presence, it was methodical. The building's electronic entry logs later confirmed it. Someone matching Denise's description had been in my unit that day. Just her, no one else. Meanwhile, Eric had opened his apartment to me without hesitation, giving me a place to sleep, shower, and even think. Over cups of coffee that tasted bitter with exhaustion, he started asking questions in that careful way friends do when they notice something off but don't want to push too hard. "Wait," he said one morning, "your parents? You said they were beneficiaries on your insurance. That's unusual, right?" I nodded, gripping my mug tightly. "I never signed anything. I don't know how it happened." My voice cracked slightly. Eric leaned back, eyes narrowing in thought, not accusatory but concerned. "And Denise came by just a few days before the fire?" he asked slowly. The way he said it, the hesitation, the pause, made me feel the first stirrings of doubt beyond my own fear. We sat there in silence for a long moment. I stared at the steam curling from my coffee, trying to convince myself it was coincidence, but Eric's look told me he didn't believe it was. Something in the pattern, the timing, the weird questions, the lingering touches, it wasn't normal. For the first time since the fire, I felt that cold, knotting certainty. Someone had been in my life in a way I hadn't noticed, someone who now loomed behind every question, every missing object, every lost possession. That memory wouldn't leave me. Not ever. A few days later, I went back to the insurance office, still jittery from the way my parents' names had appeared on my policy. Greg, the representative I had spoken with on the phone, led me into a small office with fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead. He placed a folder on the desk and opened it carefully, like he was handling evidence instead of paperwork. Then he slid a form across the table to me. My stomach twisted the moment I saw it. There it was, my signature, perfectly neat enough that I would have sworn I'd signed it myself. And yet I hadn't. The form listed Denise and Mark as 100% beneficiaries, with every line typed and signed in a way that made it look completely legitimate. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, my eyes scanning every word again and again. There was a cold finality to it that I couldn't shake. Whoever did this had planned it with precision. Greg noticed my hesitation. "I know this must be unsettling," he said carefully, "but I can assure you we'll need to investigate further." I nodded, but inside, my thoughts were spinning faster than I could follow. How had they done this? Why had no one questioned it? And the timing, Denise visiting just days before the fire, suddenly screamed louder in my mind than ever. That night, I met with Detective Nolan to go over the fire investigation. I had felt a strange relief in finally speaking to someone impartial, someone who wouldn't just shrug or pass blame. Nolan was methodical, quiet, but with a presence that made you feel like nothing could slip past him. He pulled out the fire report and leaned back in his chair, running a finger along some of the diagrams. "Laura," he said, his voice low and precise, "we're seeing patterns here that aren't consistent with an electrical failure. The burn marks near the outlet, the way the surrounding materials ignited, it's too specific. Too clean, we suspect arson." I froze, letting the words sink in. Arson. The weight of it pressed down on me, heavier than any fire could. My heart raced as I realized what that meant, not just that my apartment was gone, but that someone had deliberately set it. Nolan's eyes met mine, waiting. I hesitated. The memory of Denise wandering through my apartment earlier that month floated unbidden into my mind. Every odd question, every lingering touch, every careful observation, all of it now looked different. My throat tightened, and I swallowed hard before speaking. There was a visit, from my mom, Denise," I said slowly, reluctant but knowing I had to tell him. "She came by 5 days before the fire, spent hours inside, asked questions, touched things." My voice shook slightly, betraying my unease. I glanced down at my hands, clenched together, and took a deep breath. I didn't think it mattered at the time, but now. Nolan leaned forward, his pen poised over his notebook. "It matters," he said simply. And just like that, the thin veil of uncertainty I had been holding onto began to crumble. Evidence was beginning to form around a pattern I couldn't ignore, and the person I least expected was becoming central to everything. For the first time, the fear wasn't just about losing possessions or insurance money. It was about realizing the danger had been closer than I ever imagined. I called Denise the next morning, trying to keep my voice light, casual, as if I were just checking in. My hands still trembled slightly from the mix of coffee and adrenaline from the previous days. "Hey, Mom," I said, forcing a little cheerfulness I didn't feel. "Just wanted to talk for a minute." For a second, she responded with that practiced warmth, the kind of tone people use to mask impatience. But then I steered the conversation toward the fire investigation, careful not to reveal anything I wasn't ready to confront. I mentioned that Detective Nolan and the fire department were asking questions, describing patterns they had found. Immediately, her voice changed. The warmth drained away, replaced by a clipped, almost cold professionalism. "Laura," she said, and there was a strange tightness in her voice, "I think you should be careful about what you say. You should not discuss this without a lawyer present." I paused, stunned by the sudden shift. Her words were careful, deliberate, but the tone was unmistakable. There was fear there, yes, but it wasn't fear for me. It wasn't worry that I had lost everything or that I might be hurt. It was the kind of worry that circles someone's own safety, someone trying to shield themselves from exposure. I tried to mask the recognition, forcing a casual laugh. "Okay, sure, I'll keep that in mind." But inside, my chest felt tight. My mother, the woman who had raised me, or at least had been part of raising me, wasn't worried about me at all. She was worried about herself. The conversation continued, but every word she spoke was measured, defensive, protective in a way that only made sense if she had something to hide. She didn't ask if I had somewhere to stay, didn't ask if I was coping with losing my home. There was no empathy, no motherly concern, just careful boundaries, calculated warnings, subtle threats hidden in legal caution. I kept listening, quiet, letting her fill the silence with her own carefully arranged sentences. Each pause, each emphasis, reinforced what I had begun to suspect. She wasn't shielding me from danger. She was shielding herself from accountability. The more I thought about it, the more the puzzle pieces clicked into place. The irritation on the phone the night of the fire, the sudden visit 5 days prior, the forged insurance paperwork Greg had shown me. By the time the call ended, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. Relief that I finally understood something crucial, even if it hurt, and dread because understanding it made everything worse. I wasn't just dealing with the aftermath of a fire. I was dealing with a person who had strategically positioned herself to escape consequences, someone who had blurred the lines between parent and predator. I hung up, staring at the phone in my hands, and felt the first clear wave of clarity hit me. Denise wasn't thinking about me, not in any meaningful way. Every move, every word, every visit, it had always been about protecting herself. That realization was sharper than any shock from the fire itself, cutting through the haze of confusion and fear I had been navigating for weeks. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of it settle. Finally, for the first time, I understood where the danger truly lay. A few days later, my phone rang unexpectedly. It was my Aunt June. Her voice, usually warm and easygoing, sounded tight, strained in a way that immediately set off alarms in my chest. "Laura, I don't know what's going on, but I've been hearing things," she said carefully. "People are saying, well, that you've been unstable, that you might be inventing stories about the fire." I felt my stomach drop. "What?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Who's saying that?" She hesitated, and I could hear the faint shuffle of papers or movement in her background. "It's Denise, your mom. She's been talking, Laura, telling people you're making things up, that this whole fire situation is exaggerated." My head spun. I'd expected anger, denial, even avoidance from my mother, but this was something else entirely. This was an attack designed to make me look unreliable, to discredit me before I could even take steps to protect myself. My hands gripped the phone tighter, the warmth leaving my fingers as the reality sank in. "June, she's trying to make me look crazy," I said quietly, almost to myself. "She wants everyone to think I can't be trusted, that I'm imagining things." June sighed heavily. "I didn't want to believe it, but HR at your work even called me, asking if I thought you were behaving unusually. Someone raised concerns anonymously." The words hit me like a wave. HR, anonymous complaints. Even my professional environment, a place where I had always been careful, now infiltrated by the rumor mill my mother had started. It was more than petty gossip. It was an organized effort to erode my credibility, my support network, even my standing at work. I sank into the chair, feeling the weight of betrayal settle over me like smoke from the fire itself. Every phone call, every visit, every casual remark Denise had made suddenly took on a new, sinister meaning. She wasn't just detached or self-serving, she was actively trying to dismantle me, to make me seem unhinged so no one would believe what I knew was true. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to calm the rapid pulse in my chest. My apartment, my possessions, my insurance, all that damage had been tangible, visible, something I could measure and begin to recover from. But this was invisible, insidious, and far harder to confront. She was attempting to control the narrative, even from miles away. "What do I do?" June asked hesitantly, her voice soft now. Concern was there, but filtered through her own uncertainty. I took a deep breath, letting the anger simmer behind my ribs. "I document everything," I said finally. "Every call, every message, every strange thing she says. HR, insurance, everything has to have a record, because this isn't just gossip. She's trying to destroy me, Aunt June, and I'm not going to let her get away with it." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of focus amid the exhaustion. My fear was real, my anger sharp, but clarity had arrived. Denise wasn't only a threat to my property or possessions, she was actively undermining my credibility, my life, and I had to respond with precision, not panic. I ended the call and sat quietly for a moment, letting the realization settle. Every instinct in me screamed that the next steps would be crucial. The fire had destroyed my apartment, yes, but now, the fight was also about reclaiming the truth and protecting my reputation from someone who should have loved me. Detective Nolan called me into the office one afternoon, a stack of security footage queued on his monitor. I sat beside him, the hum of the computers filling the room, and watched the familiar grainy images of the building's lobby. My stomach tightened as the timeline approached the day of the fire. There she was, Denise entering the lobby carrying a large black bag. Her movements were casual at first, almost mundane, as she swiped her access card and disappeared into the elevator. Nolan paused the footage, pointing at the timestamp. "She was in your unit for nearly 3 hours, he said quietly, far longer than she claimed she'd be. We watched together as the camera angles shifted, her hand brushing over the bag, her head turning to glance at the hallway, the elevator doors closing. The bag was conspicuously large, black, unremarkable enough to blend in with the crowd, yet in my mind it suddenly carried a weight I hadn't allowed myself to imagine before. When she left, the bag was gone. Empty. I felt a chill rise through me, the realization hitting harder than any image of the burned apartment. She had been in my home, alone, long enough to do whatever she had intended. And the black bag, whatever it had contained, was no longer there, leaving behind only questions and the gnawing suspicion of deliberate action. Nolan's next reveal made my stomach drop further. Fire investigators had recovered fragments of a digital timer from the fire's origin point, small pieces, almost trivial, but they matched a type of timer one could purchase commercially. It wasn't accidental. The fragments weren't random debris, they were precise, deliberate, and placed to ensure the fire ignited in a particular pattern. "Laura," Nolan said, leaning back slightly, "these pieces, combined with her presence that day and the timing, it's consistent with someone setting the fire intentionally." He didn't need to spell it out. I could see it myself. The investigation took another turn when store footage came in, documenting Denise buying a similar timer about a week before the fire. My pulse throbbed painfully as I saw her walking through the aisles, scanning items, picking up the timer, and swiping her card. Every motion was deliberate, every second recorded, a trail of intent that linked directly back to her. I felt a mixture of disbelief and a cold, gnawing anger. Part of me wanted to scream, to confront her immediately, but another part recognized the necessity of restraint. This was bigger than emotion. It was evidence, undeniable, and I had to let it unfold in the right channels. Watching the footage again, seeing the timeline, the bag, the timer, everything clicking into place, it was almost surreal. The puzzle pieces of her visit, the insurance fraud, the sudden coldness on the phone, even the rumors she'd been spreading, all of it converged into a single, terrifying realization. This was premeditated, precise, and horrifyingly personal. I sat back in my chair, my hands trembling slightly. Nolan's quiet presence beside me grounded me, his voice calm but firm as he summarized. "The evidence isn't just circumstantial anymore. It's direct. And now we have a clear link between her and the fire." For the first time, the fear of the unknown shifted into something tangible. The person I had once called my mother was no longer a distant, abstract threat. She was a calculated actor, and the proof was right there in front of me. The next steps would be decisive, and nothing could erase the clarity that had just settled like ice in my chest. I knew I couldn't navigate this alone, not with the fire, the forged insurance, and the smear campaigns swirling around me. That's when I hired Sylvia Kim, an insurance fraud attorney with a reputation for cutting through deception like a scalpel. Sitting across from her in her office, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension, my hands twisting nervously in my lap as I laid out everything. The fire, the unusual insurance paperwork, the rumors, Denise's suspicious visit, and the evidence Nalan had gathered. Sylvia listened carefully, taking meticulous notes, her expression serious but steady. "We'll start by verifying the signatures and the paperwork," she said. Within days, the lab results came back. The signature on the insurance form was not only forged but professionally done. The sophistication of the forgery made it clear this wasn't some casual attempt. It was calculated, deliberate, and intended to stand up on paper as legitimate. Next, Sylvia had me speak with the insurance office clerk who remembered the day the form was submitted. The woman's brow furrowed as she recalled a visit from a woman claiming to be handling paperwork on my behalf, insisting she was helping her daughter. It was quick, and she seemed confident, the clerk remembered. I didn't question it at the time because she looked official, but now, looking back, it all makes sense. Hearing this confirmed what my gut had been telling me for weeks. Denise had orchestrated everything. She had planted herself in the system, manipulated the paperwork, and now had layers of cover if anyone ever questioned the insurance company. The sheer audacity of it made my jaw tighten. Then came the next move from her side. I received an invitation, or rather, a summons disguised as a casual family gathering. The language was careful, friendly, almost neutral, but Sylvia and Nalan had both warned me to treat it as a potential trap. From everything we'd uncovered, Denise's goal was clear: to paint me as unstable, to make the family and anyone observing believe that I was the one making false accusations, inventing conspiracies, and overreacting to the fire. I spent the day preparing, going over the evidence with Sylvia and Nalan. Every detail mattered: the forged paperwork, the security footage, the timer fragments, the store footage, and the clerk's recollection. We had to be ready for her manipulation, to prevent her from turning the narrative back on me in front of others. My pulse quickened as I rehearsed what I would say, how I would react, and when I would let the evidence speak for itself. Even as I prepared, there was a tension in the air that wouldn't release. The thought of sitting in the same room as Denise, under the guise of a normal family event, while knowing everything she had done, felt almost unbearable. Yet the focus and calm Sylvia instilled reminded me that this was not a social visit. This was a calculated showdown. The fire, the forged documents, the smears, all of it had led to this moment. By evening, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I could no longer doubt her intentions, and I couldn't underestimate the stakes. The gathering wasn't innocent, it was a stage, and she was hoping I would falter. But for the first time, I felt the edge of control shift ever so slightly toward me, because for once, I had the proof, the strategy, and the team to confront it. The room felt thick with tension when I arrived at the family gathering, the kind of quiet that makes every cough and shuffle feel amplified. Denise was already there, smiling carefully, but her eyes carried that sharp, controlled edge I'd come to recognize. It didn't take long. Within minutes, she was speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear, pointing at me with a mix of indignation and practiced concern. She accused me of saying disturbing things, inventing stories, and creating conflict where none existed, painting me as unstable in front of relatives who hadn't seen her manipulations firsthand. I froze for a heartbeat, a flash of anger and disbelief coursing through me, but then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a message from Detective Nalan. The security footage, the timer evidence, the clerk's recollection, all laid bare, time-stamped, undeniable. I glanced at Sylvia, who gave me a small, affirming nod. In that moment, clarity replaced my shock. I stood, straightened my shoulders, and walked out of the room calmly, letting the evidence speak louder than words ever could. Outside, the air felt sharp against my skin, but I didn't stop. Within minutes, my phone rang again, Nalan telling me the police were at Denise's house. I arrived with him and Sylvia shortly after. The confrontation was swift. Officers entered, reading rights while Denise's carefully constructed facade cracked in real time. Her eyes widened, hands trembling, her voice rising in panic. Mark, pale and tense, finally admitted the truth. It had all been her idea, and his gambling debts had driven his complicity. The legal proceedings moved methodically from there. Court documents confirmed everything: the insurance fraud, the arson, the fabricated signatures. Denise received a 6-year prison sentence, the weight of her actions finally made concrete. Mark was handed probation and mandatory treatment, his role acknowledged but punished proportionally. I was restored as the rightful beneficiary of my $180,000 insurance payout, the paperwork corrected, the financial theft reversed. A few months later, Denise wrote from prison, her words tinged with desperation, asking for a visit. I read the letter, felt the old mix of anger and disbelief stirring, and then folded it neatly without a word. I knew what survival meant now, not reconciliation, not returning to the chaos, but drawing firm lines around who could be part of my life. Standing outside my apartment one evening, the sun low in the sky, I felt a quiet certainty settle in. Family isn't just blood, it's who chooses to protect, support, and be present when it counts. I had lost a home, treasures, and illusions of maternal loyalty, but I had gained control, clarity, and the ability to choose who mattered. The fire had burned more than possessions. It had illuminated boundaries I'd never realized I needed. And for the first time in months, I felt the weight of standing unbroken. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.